Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing good. Of course, we're doing the rest of the Sulla video. What? We were saying we were going to do it in 2 parts. We're going to finish it. It shouldn't be that bad to do it in 1 video. Glad you're here. Grab some popcorn if you got popcorn. If you don't have popcorn, don't grab popcorn because you don't have popcorn. But let's just jump right into it, shall we?
Scipio and Norbanus were in Campania, rallying the consular armies to face Sulla. Eager to get the show on the road, and likely pressured by many of his aristocratic supporters to do just that, Sulla and his army of conquest crossed from Dyrrhachium in 2 contingents, one of which landed at Tarentum, while the other, including among it himself, sought harbour at Brundisium. Likely a bit nervous at what he was about to do, Sulla got a bit of relief when the Brundisians didn't resist his landing, instead welcoming the general.
I guess, you don't know. There's been probably so many rumors while you're being gone that you don't know if you have the people on your side, especially since you're the optimists, right?
In gratitude, residents of this faithful coastal city were granted exemption from the harbour tax. More than a gesture of simple thankfulness, however, this boon was almost certainly part of a wider propaganda campaign designed to show Italy that if towns and cities supported the Sullan cause, they would be richly rewarded. Whatever the case, 40,000 invading Roman troops were now on home soil. The two divisions linked up shortly after their arrival and began an inexorable march towards Campania, where the enemy armies were massing. Not only did Marcus Licinius Crassus join Sulla en route, but another total wildcard made his Machiavellian opening move in a political and military career that would eventually have him become Rome's most powerful man.
Pompey? Or are we talking about Caesar?
Erupting from vast family estates in Picenium, a rising star in his early 20s named Gnaeus Pompey raised a small band of troops.
I'd say Caesar's much younger than Pompey, I think, right? So it had to be Pompey.
As Cassius Dio called them, from his swathe of clients, as well as his father's die-hard veterans, and declared for Sulla. This opportunistic proclamation came after the young man had initially marched with Cinna during his doomed venture. After soundly beating Marian forces under Carbo, who subsequently arrived to stop him, Pompey arrived at Sulla's camp, where he was treated with incredible respect and declared Imperator.
What a start to a career.
With these illustrious new friends, and many more flocking to his banner, Sulla advanced along the Via Appia until the army reached Cordium. Detouring, he then swept by Seticula and Calatia with a first true strategic objective firmly in sight, Capua. On his way, Sulla was able—
Yeah, I'm wondering why Neapolis is shown much larger here. I thought Capua was like the largest city in in Italy besides Rome. Is that true? I think that's true. But why is Neapolis just so much larger here?
To forbid and enforce a complete ban on looting the Italian countryside. His cause was to be that of a heroic Roman liberator who meted out harsh justice to the guilty, but retained mercy for the innocent. Moreover, clemency might induce desertion from the enemy's cause, which was of course the prime motivator. Meanwhile, Norbanus and Scipio managed to get their Greenhorn armies together and march to war themselves, directed by Carbo. Unsure which line of march Sulla would opt for, the consuls divided their formidable forces, with Norbanus taking a slightly larger force to block the Volturnus crossing on the crossroad between the Via Appia and Latina. Scipio took up a position further north, near the city of Taenum Sedicinum. The war was about to begin in earnest.
And we've seen this frontier before when we watched the Second Punic War with Hannibal. That river, that crossing is so important.
When Sulla grasped that he was facing 2 divided armies rather than a single overwhelming one, the Optimate proconsul beelined down the road to Capua and straight at Norbanus, whose dedication to the Marian cause was more fervent than that of his consular colleague. His army, whose command structure included Marius's son, was also the more dangerous of the 2, being larger and subject to—
It's not a bad sized army at all.
—to greater discipline. The 2 armies caught sight of one another when Sulla neared Norbanus's position on the Volturnus. His spirits made optimistic by the support of so many prominent men of the Republic, Sulla sent emissaries in an attempt to bring the bristly consul over to the Optimate side and to avoid the slaughter of Romans. The proconsul's olive branch was snapped when Norbanus harmed the envoys, and a great battle became inevitable.
Bro harmed the envoys? Have some respect.
On the rolling foothills of Mount Tifata, 40,000 Sullan troops met roughly 60,000 Marians, and crushed them with contemptuous ease, supposedly not even having to properly get in formation to do so. According to Plutarch, the veterans' enthusiasm and zeal for the melee was so great that they simply swept Norbanus's newly raised army away in a great rush, killing somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 men, whilst apparently only losing 70. Sulla himself commented later that it was this moment that made him believe victory was probable. Until Tifata, Sulla had been secretly nervous.
I mean, for good reason. You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know really what type of training or rigorous enthusiasm that these individuals might have, but the veteranship of the Mithridatic War is showing here.
That the soldiers might desert him and return to their homes, as was customary for legionaries all throughout the Republic. Victory against the bellicose consul only fired up the soldiers even further, making them all the more confident in final victory and solidly aligned to their great red-headed general. Although Norbanus managed to retreat behind the walls of Capua with most of his battered army, Sulla judged him to not be an immediate threat and turned north. It was Scipio's turn. Thundering up the Via Latina towards Taenum, Sulla's army met the Second Consular Army near its base, but didn't immediately go on the attack. Optimistic about the prospects of diplomacy with a more moderate leader, the proconsul put out feelers and managed to arrange talks with Scipio. Although the back-and-forth term-talking was initially cordial enough, Scipio felt it only right and proper to inform his defeated co-consul what he was doing, and to seek his counsel. So he dispatched the most prominent Marian in the army, except for himself, to act as go-between. Unfortunately for Scipio, that man was another Roman legend, Quintus Sertorius, future guerrilla king of Hispania. Despising Sulla, Sertorius went on the consul's mission, but intentionally provoked a fight by capturing Suessa on the way, a town which had sided with the Optimates.
Oh my.
Stunned, Scipio returned Sulla's hostages, and the armies prepared for battle.
Stunned?
It was at this moment the proconsul sprang a trap which would become one of his most famous. Aware that the Scipione legions were far from secure in loyalty anyway, and furthermore blamed the consuls for breaking the armistice, Sulla had his own veteran soldiers strategically fraternize with the enemy during the entire duration of his parley with Scipio. What exactly the proconsul's troops said or did isn't known.
Might probably bribe them with words, right? Yo, you guys are going to be the losing side. Look what we just did to that bigger army way over there. Don't you want to be with the winning side? Because the winning side's going to get land or riches or promotion or whatever. Who knows?
But we can imagine them bringing extra rations to the Marian camp, along with a portion of their eastern treasure, sharing both, and by doing so, championing their general's cause. This kind of interaction must have taken place around 1,000 campfires and in 100 grand tents.
Wow.
Rank-and-file soldiers were gradually convinced by argument, flattery, and thinly veiled bribery.
Jeez.
In the upper echelons, Sullan officers might have shared drinks with their adversarial counterparts.
I mean, they're both Romans, right? At the end of the day, so why would they? It's not like they're talking to Parthians here. It's not crazy.
And were turned by promises of position and power. By the time Sulla drew up his army and advanced on Scipio's tent, the latter's authority rested on a foundation of sand. The consul had no idea. In a prearranged signal, 20 cohorts of Sulla's veterans saluted Scipio's encamped warriors in a greeting which was returned by a greeting of their own. Then, to the consul's utter disbelief, the entire army streamed out of the camp and flocked to join Sulla as if their minds had been enchanted. Thoroughly outmaneuvered, Scipio simply sat bemused in his tent until the Sullans came to get him. The consul was captured and dismissed by his enemy, unharmed.
Unharmed. Very, 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 well, what's the word? I don't know. Honorable.
Still, a large part of Italy still supported the Marian cause against the invaders, and so Sulla was forced to keep his tact front and center. With Scipio appropriately dealt with, Sulla turned about and once again sent entreaties to Norbanus, probably aiming to repeat his sorcerer's trick. They failed once again, and the proconsul proclaimed his unstoppable advance on Capua. Unwilling to stand against Sulla there, the surviving consul abandoned the city and made his way to the Marian stronghold at Praeneste. A lull in the fighting followed, during which both factions took a breath,
So this has got to be the last stand right here, right?
drew back, and prepared for the second round.
Gotta be.
Up until this point, Sulla had made an attempt at negotiating every time he had the chance. Rejected, it was this moment which saw the war descend into a bloodbath, justified by said rejections. By the end of the year 83 BC, Sulla and his legions had won many Italian cities to their cause as they continued their march to Capua. However, his Marian enemies were still strong, and a tense military standoff ensued, with both sides attempting to raise additional forces for the coming campaigns. A bitter winter also froze the respective armies in place, locking any movement down until the thaw of 82. When the year turned, elections took place in Rome and new consuls were elected. Somewhat predictably given the circumstances, Carbo and Marius the Younger were appointed to the position.
I'm guessing that's his son.
Just as Caesar's hallowed name would serve as a potent weapon for Octavian decades later, elevating Gaius Marius's son to the consulship engendered a renewed burst of support from the Marian heartlands in Etruria and Umbria. There, the old general's name was still encased in gold, and his veterans
I mean, think about it though. That's the victor of the Jugurthian War, the victor of the Cimbrian War, where if you think about the Cimbrian War, like if you live in Rome and you're just like propagandized and as well, you're just listening, your ears to the wind, you just hear all these barbarians tearing up your sons and your fathers in the north, and then this consul who comes from the Jugurthian War starts like reforming stuff, and then he goes and he wins, and that is gold itself. 6 consulships, 7, but not finished with the 7th. But that is like unprecedented type of it's crazy.
Subsequently turned out in great numbers to support their revered commander's heir. It is important to point out that the main armies marching around Italy, despite their immense size, were not the be-all and end-all of the war. Regions and their cities may have predominantly leaned one way or the other, but all throughout the Roman heartland, bitter factional strife raged between pro- and anti-Sulla factions. A Sullan proponent in the Umbrian city of Ameria, for example, briefly managed to incite the people into supporting the invading general, but was cut down by unknown Marian assassins not long after.
Anything around Rome right now is going to be the Marian faction, I would say.
When the campaigning season of 82...
Because think about it, remember, it's the Optimates versus the Popularis, and most of the Popularis is supporting city dwellers, so Rome, city dwellings.
BC began, Sulla sent Metellus and Pompey with an army north to confront Carbo at Ariminum, and to make a play for Cisalpine Gaul. At the river Acis, the Populares and Optimates met once more for battle, with 5 cohorts defecting over to the Optimates. The fight was fierce but rapid, as the main line of the Optimates was able to push the Populares back, allowing Pompey to then finish them off with a cavalry assault. At the same time, the proconsul continued his personal advance on Rome, and encountered a larger army under Marius the Younger at Sacriporto. Sulla had been attempting to reach Dolabella, whom he hoped would defect to his side, but Marius the Younger had hemmed his forces in by blockading the roads into Latium with a force of 40,000 men. Sulla, however, was eager to break through the defense, having experienced a vision of Marius the Elder warning his son that he would suffer a great military disaster on that day. However, his soldiers were exhausted, and a rain earlier in the day had waterlogged their equipment and the battlefield, prompting his tribunes to advise him to pitch camp instead and rest for the night. Sulla relented, and while his soldiers began digging defensive earthworks, Marius the Younger assaulted his position. However, when Sulla's men fought back, 5 cohorts and 2 cavalry allies defected to Sulla, prompting a collapse of
This is a theme.
Marius's forces and causing a rout. It is said that between 15 and 25,000 soldiers of the Populares were killed in a slaughter, breaking Marius's forces completely.
Jeez.
The defeated Marian commander and his shattered army ran for shelter to Praeneste, but Sulla pursued them so closely and fiercely that the Praenestians were forced to shut the gates before Marius himself could enter. In a hair-raising moment, the beleaguered general was hauled over the wall by a rope, while his men were captured or massacred against the fortifications. In a grim forecast of what was to come, Sulla had all the Samnites among them executed as rebels.
Poor Samnites, they have just got the worst of the worst the last 300 years.
Devoured by paranoia and fury at being humbled in such an embarrassing way, Marius the Younger sent grim orders to Rome that anyone suspected of loyalty to Sulla was to be killed. To that end, 4 prominent figures who had previously supported reconciliation with Sulla, including the Pontifex Maximus, Mucius Scaevola, were slain as they tried to escape.
Wait, isn't it, if you touch the Pontifex Maximus, aren't you like, isn't that a death by itself? Or is there a final act in this sense? I mean, there's nothing that's not unprecedented at this point, but come on.
Further intensifying the bloody ideological nature of the war. Leaving a small force to keep Marius at bay in Praeneste, Sulla split his main army into 2 distinct divisions and pushed north on Carbo. Sulla's group, traversing the Via Cassia toward Clusium, defeated an enemy cavalry force on the river Clanis. The second group, moving along the Via Clodia, continued on without incident and defeated enemy forces near Saturnia. The details of the battles of the river Clanis and Saturnia are fascinating as they tell us about Carbo's strategy, stringing out small forces along the route to bog Sulla down with skirmishes as a delaying tactic. Meanwhile, Carbo himself was amassing an impressive force for battle, large enough that he could split off 8 legions to march.
Is Marius alive? Who's Marius? He's alive? I thought he was dead at 87 BC.
South down the Via Flaminia to break the siege of Praeneste under his legate C. Marcius Cancerinus. The proconsul himself then came to blows with the consul's main army near Clusium itself, but the grueling day-long battle had no clear winner. Elsewhere, the war was also going well for the Sullan cause. Metellus was able to craftily sail around the Marian strongpoint at Ariminum to advance on Cisalpine Gaul by Ravenna, and Optimate forces were sweeping their way across Sardinia. Pompey was marching against Carbo's blockading force under C. Carinus at Sens Gallicus and engaged them in battle. Losing 3,000 of his men, Carinus was forced to retreat to the city of Spoletium and requested reinforcements. Carbo's relief force, however, was quickly located and ambushed by Sulla, who slew 2,000 of them and routed the remainder.
Dang, I did not think that this was going to pick up like that. I really thought that after Praeneste they were going to slow down.
Having lost control of both the Via Cassia and Via Flaminia, Carbo was forced to make a bolder move, sending Cancerinus and his legions on a rapid march to outflank Sulla and relieve Praeneste. Again, Sulla was able to locate the relief force and intercept it, ambushing them at a pass and then surrounding them on a nearby hilltop. Cancerinus was quickly blamed by his men for leading them into disaster, and most of the army deserted, leaving him with a mere 7 cohorts in the end.
Jeez.
Having lost a massive part of his forces, Carbo and Norbanus retreated north to deal with Metellus. At the Battle of Faventia, Carbo attempted a rapid march to reach and defeat Metellus before nightfall, arriving an hour before sundown. In their attempt to surprise Metellus, they had made their plans hastily and stumbled into thick vineyards, allowing Metellus to respond with greater care. Between 9,000 and 10,000 of Carbo's forces were slain, with another 6,000 deserting, and only 1,000 making it back to Ariminum intact. Upon hearing of this news, a legion of the Lucanians defected to Metellus, further bolstering his forces, while their commander, Albino Vanus, had managed to arrange a nasty assassination of all of Carbo and Norbanus' commanders in a feast, leaving the Populares leaderless and completely on the back foot. Norbanus chose this moment to flee Italy and commit suicide, while Carbo desperately attempted once again to break the siege of Praeneste, only for his forces to be defeated once more at the Battle of Fidentia by Marcus Lucullus, brother of the more famous general of that name. At Fidentia, Lucullus had found himself severely outnumbered, with 18 cohorts facing nearly 50 loyal to Carbo and the Populares under Quinctius. Worse still, his men were short on arms and ammunition. However, a breeze blew flowers down from the mountains, which attached themselves to the men, forming the appearance of wreaths and garlands on the helmets and shields of his men.
The gods bestowed their blessing.
Taking this as an omen, and with morale soaring, Lucullus and his men attacked, breaking Quinctius's army and slaying 10 to 18,000 of them.
Popularis is just, this is the worst days of their lives.
Retreating back to Clusium, Carbo and his remaining army of 30,000 men once more engaged Pompey near the city, but allegedly 2/3 of his army was slaughtered in the battle. However, due to one of Sulla's previous sanctions, the proconsul himself was to be denied a decisive victory directly against Carbo, possibly triggered by the proconsul's wanton slaughter of Samnite prisoners after thrashing Marius before Praeneste. A fresh allied force of up to 70,000 Samnites and Lucanians burst from Samnium and went straight for the small force Sulla had ordered to keep the young consul in check. Disengaging from his campaign in Etruria, Sulla doubled back with blistering alacrity and managed to install his own army in a pass between the interlopers and Praeneste. The Italians attempted to break in, while Marius tried to break out. Both failed. But now
That is impressive.
the coalition army, which was under the command of a Samnite known as Pontius Telesinus, alongside M. Lamponius and Gutta, all survivors of the last social war, was in big trouble. It had Sulla in front, apparently unbreakable with his natural fortress, while dashing Pompey was swiftly following up behind, ready to crush the recalcitrant Italians from both sides. What Telesinus needed was a distraction to pull Sulla out from his position, and the Samnite leader had a very shiny one close by. Abruptly breaking camp during the dark hours of October 31st of 82 BC, Telesinus's great army closed in on Rome itself, a city which was almost utterly undefended due to the ongoing conflict. After joining with some remnant Marian forces, this terrifying force arrived and encamped
That's siege engines.
1 mile outside the Eternal City's Colline Gate. A historian, senator, and soldier of the era, known as Velleius Paterculus, states that this was the most critical situation Rome had faced since Hannibal had camped just miles from the city.
And Hannibal wasn't even that, worried about. I mean, Hannibal could have took Rome. We know that. That it could have happened. But, and if you don't think that could have happened, let me know below. I'm very curious to hear your argument. But there's no way that he couldn't have. But, that's crazy.
To Cannae. He puts a speech in Telesinus's mouth in which he proclaims, "The last day is at hand for the Romans. These wolves that made such ravages on Italian liberty will never vanish until we have cut down the forest that harbors them."
So this is like an after effect of the social war. The Samnites have always wanted independence, and now they're going to try for it with this power vacuum.
For the first time ever, a coalition of Rome's Italian neighbors were in a position to take the city.
Ooh.
But Sulla, suddenly understanding the threat, was
So now Sulla can reposition this if he defends Rome, and then everyone will defect to him.
hurrying in order to stop them. Unwilling to chance assaulting the massive capital while a dangerous enemy army was on his heels, no matter how tempting it was, Telesinus restrained his forces and prepared to meet Sulla for the great final battle. It was so final because Carbo, defeated in the north by the other Optimate generals, had withdrawn to Sicily. This was it. A small force of young citizens sallied out of the city against Telesinus, but were repelled. Sending forward a squadron of several hundred cavalry to harry the attackers and make their onward movement sluggish, Sulla, rushing down the Via Praenestina, managed to get beyond the Samnite-led coalition army and encamped next to the Temple of Venus, just outside the Colline Gate at noon. If the enemy wanted to breach Rome, they would have to get past his veterans.
Which no one has yet.
Several of the proconsul's officers, noting the tiredness of the men and the lateness of the hour, advised their general to not attack. However, eager for battle and confident of victory, Sulla brought his standards to bear, arrayed his troops, and attacked regardless, initiating the battle in late afternoon. The right flank, led by Crassus, won victory with the ease to which the Sullans had become accustomed, driving their opposition all the way to
Bro, stop chasing! Turn!
Antemnae with massive losses. However, beset by fierce Samnite warriors and exhausted from the march, Sulla's own left flank collapsed under the pressure, and his men routed towards the gate, despite their commander's swashbuckling efforts at rallying them. However, Roman veterans manning the walls dropped the portcullis in fear that the enemy might follow in after.
That means the gate's closed.
Blocking the line of retreat. Faced with resistance or death, Sulla's troops turned, fought, and in the early evening managed to turn the tide. As the great battle began winding down near the Colline Gate, messengers came to Sulla from Crassus, who had been separated from his leader at the start of the battle. Informed of the deaths of Telsius and Albinus, and the resulting triumph, the proconsul realized with some confusion that he had won the battle, and with it, the war. The brutality and deadliness of this battle was so great that 50,000 men apparently died within earshot of Rome that day. 8,000 Samnite prisoners were also summarily executed. After his decisive triumph was confirmed, Sulla went to attend Crassus at Antemnae, where a 30,000-strong segment of the besieged garrison, swollen by refugees from the clash at the Colline Gate, proceeded to beg the victorious proconsul for mercy. In his typically Vulpine manner, Sulla stated that he would grant them mercy, but only if they would do some mischief to his other enemies inside beforehand. They did so, desperately slaughtering thousands of their own allies and allowing the proconsul inside. It was a terrible mistake. They didn't realize the time for mercy or humanity was over.
Right when I was thinking Sulla was a good thing for Rome.
Disarmed and at the mercy of their conqueror, the remaining Samnite and Lucanian prisoners, about 6,000 in number, were marched into Rome and herded into the Villa Publica. As this was happening, Sulla summoned the Senate to the nearby Temple of Bellona and began orating to the august body of his deeds in the Mithridatic War and in the catastrophic civil war he had just won. The moment Sulla did begin to speak, however, a strange noise became audible. It might not have been overly distinguishable at first amid the hustle and bustle of the capital, but as the sounds multiplied, it was very clear to every senator what the noise was.
Those prisoners being slaughtered.
Terrified, agonized shrieking. Noticing the senatorial disquiet, Sulla simply said in calm and composed language that the senators ought to keep their attention firmly on him and not worry about what was going on outside. It was, he said, only a matter of criminals being punished on his orders. If the cause of the noise wasn't clear enough, Sulla had penned the 6,000 prisoners from Antemnae into a public building and just massacred them in earshot of the Senate as a warning. After this, he...
Dang. That was strategically done so the Senate falls in line.
Went and addressed the people also. His message was stark. The guiltless needn't fear, but anybody who had been his enemy since Scipio's broken truce was essentially finished. Barely straining his muscles, Sulla marched on Praeneste and induced Marius the Younger to commit suicide.
Jeez.
Before executing a great number of his troops. One account, probably more accurate, details how Sulla, now de facto dictator of Rome, split the townspeople into 3 groups: Roman, Samnite, and Praenestine. The latter categories were executed to the last man, while the Romans were treated to a verbal thrashing.
Anyone that was Praenestian, that lived in Praeneste, was dead. Wow.
They deserved to die horribly for the crimes they had committed, Sulla said, but nevertheless he spared them. Throughout the Italian peninsula, Sulla's supporters engaged in an overly vigorous mass slaying of their defeated enemies, leading one senator to plead with Sulla would he please confirm who he wanted saved and who he wanted dead. He did just that. The next morning, the dictator posted a list of 80 public enemies who could be killed with impunity, including Carbo, Norbanus, Scipio, and Sertorius. The morning after
Jeez.
that, 220 additional names appeared.
My gosh, this is McCarthyism to its max.
On the third day, about the same amount more. These were the famous proscription lists. Many Marian renegades were hunted down and their heads brought to Sulla, but
This is... Octavian would do the same thing.
innocents also suffered under the predation of the dictator's agents. A certain Quintus Aurelius, a quiet but rich man whose role in the political struggle consisted of simply counseling with others, entered the forum one day to find his own name on the list. Understanding the reason immediately, Aurelius exclaimed, "Woe is me, my Alban farm has informed against me." It is important to realize that these avarice-driven excesses were not Sulla's intention, although his brutal policy did enable them. However brutal his actual motivations may have been towards political enemies, they at least seem to have been driven by a greater good. When he discovered that Crassus had executed a man in Brutium purely to acquire the man's estate, Sulla cast the future triumvir out and forbade him from embarking on public business again. In a legislative capacity, Sulla redoubled his attack on the troublesome position of tribune, which he believed to be the toxic component in the Roman system. To remedy the situation, he
The checks against the balance.
both deprived the tribunes of any power to introduce new laws to the people, and also prevented any man who had occupied the tribunician rank from seeking any other magistracy. By doing this, he discouraged the perennially ambitious Roman political class from seeking the position in the first place.
Wow.
Along with his political massacring of the people's representative, Sulla also set about attempting to prevent any future attempt to do what he had so recently done as proconsul, lead a loyal army from the provinces into Italy and seize the Republic for himself. To do this, he made the maiestas or treason laws more strict. Treasonous actions on the part of governors,
Which will probably make way for when Caesar does it, make Caesar public enemy number one because of these laws, right?
were now exactly defined. It was treasonous should a governor refuse to return from his province within 30 days of his successor's arrival, lead an army out of their province, or ward without the Senate's permission. On the home
Rules for thee, but not for me. Such a hypocrite, Sulla.
front, Sulla initiated the Lex Cornelia Annalis, solidifying the traditional structure of the cursus honorium. A politician was required to be 36 to be elected aedile, 39 for the praetorship, and 42 to serve as a consul.
Wow.
Another old law was brought back into full force, which stated that when a man held a specific office, he could not hold that office again until a decade had passed.
A consul.
These were just some of the many
Which Marius, of course, I mean, some of these laws might be good for the good of the people, for the good of Rome. Most of them are, really. But, like, it's crazy because there's some good and bad here.
measures
right?
Sulla took as the wayward republic's guiding steward, its most notorious dictator. He acutely tweaked, duly modified, and dutifully restored institutions wherever he took issue. But it would be wrong to call these changes reforms. They were designed
They're not reforms. They're just taking it, they're just reinstitutionalizing them.
not to bring on a new age, as many reforms are, but to bring back a brilliant system which Sulla believed had degenerated and been taken down the wrong path. Once the dictator believed that all could be done was done in his service of maintaining Rome in its traditional form, he did as most Roman dictators did. In contrary
Retired to Campania.
to the eponymous power-mad tyrants of our modern age, Sulla relinquished his great power voluntarily and became a private citizen once more. Then, in an act which Cincinnatus would have been proud of, he took himself from the capital and retired to a luxurious villa near Puteoli. There, Sulla Felix indulged in the noble pursuit of hunting and spent a great deal of time fishing in solitude. Indoors, he hosted many of the old theatre comrades with whom he had associated in the days before his prominence, lounging on couches, talking, swapping jokes, and drinking fine wines day after.
This move makes me believe that his entire ideology from when he got back from campaign was to get to this point. And that can be shown with his merciless slaughter because he's tired. He's tired of doing this, it seems like. And if there's no enemy to fight, I can do it a lot faster. I can get to this point a lot faster. That's what I feel like he's trying to do. He's trying to hurry up and get to the good life. He's a public servant, but at heart, he's a military man at heart. But on the contrary, he also wants to calm down. He wants to go to a life of luxury and peace. But to do that, he had to kill all his enemies. That's basically what I'm seeing.
After day. As he lived out the final years of his life in this most degenerate of ways, the former ruler of Rome also penned his memoirs, of which unfortunately only fragments survive today.
Fragments?
Gradually, given his repeated intense bouts of drinking and cohorting, Sulla's health began to decline. Although technically retired, he was still able to exercise power. In a final burst of energy, he ended a period of discord between the new colonists of Puteoli and some of the older inhabitants. A small time later, Sulla discovered that a magistrate known as Granius was withholding money destined for the treasury. After having this corrupt man brought into his presence, Sulla shouted that he be strangled, but suffered a hemorrhage in his anger and died the following morning in 78 BC. However pivotal this man was for the history of the Roman Republic and its future, it is perhaps one of the things he didn't do that was truly to have the longest lasting impact. During the dictatorship of Sulla, a number of noble supporters interceded on behalf of a young man whom the ruler wanted dead for refusing his wishes. Eventually relenting, Sulla is said to have remarked, "Very well then, you win, take him. But never forget that the man whom you want me to spare will one day prove the ruin of the party which you and I have so long defended. There are many Mariuses in this fellow." The fellow,
he's gonna say Caesar,
of whom Sulla spoke, whose life he so reluctantly spared, was one Gaius Julius Caesar,
who was very outspoken.
We have more videos on Roman history available exclusively for our members and patrons.
But who knows if that's true? Do you guys think that's true? That a lot of people like to legenize and create some romanticism within, like, after the fact. And a lot of contemporaries aren't even contemporaries; they're like decades or hundreds of years later when they write things. So who knows what's true and what's not true? But what we do know is Sulla's life and battles. Love this documentary. It really just created just a perfect contextualized message of who Sulla was, what he did, and how he ended his life through anger and drinking. And I said ended his life because even though he really didn't have a choice in the matter, it kind of just went that way. Whew. Anything that went under my radar, let me know below. Let me know some video suggestions that you guys might have. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll just plug a couple things. Join our Discord by clicking in the description below. Subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate we have over 1,600 subscribers now on this channel. Thank you guys so much for that. As well as, yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Until next time, though, peace out and bye-bye.